My name is Margaret Ellison, and when I was lying in bed sick, struggling to swallow soup and breathe through cracked lips, my daughter-in-law stood in the hallway and said, "She's being dramatic. Again. I've lived a long life. I know the difference between a common cold and something that feels like your body is giving up on you. It started with exhaustion, then the headaches, then the cough that rattled my ribs. When my knees gave out halfway to the kitchen and I had to crawl to the fridge for water, I knew it was time to ask for help. I remember picking up my phone. My fingers trembled. My voice cracked. But I called. It was my daughter-in-law Mia who picked up. I asked if she or my daughter could drop by for a bit just to help around the house, maybe bring groceries or warm up some soup. I thought it was a small ask. I had been there for them through every move, every scraped knee, every layoff and new baby. I even co-signed their mortgage. She said, "Margaret, we're really busy this week. You're probably just a little tired. Try drinking tea." Then she hung up. That moment, that precise silence after the call ended, was the beginning of the unraveling, not just of my body, but of everything I had believed about family. 2 days passed. No one came. I lived in silence in a house I helped pay for while the people I raised and supported ignored every call, every cry, every moan that echoed through the rooms I once filled with their laughter. I couldn't get up the stairs anymore, so I slept on the couch. I rationed what little food I had, some crackers, canned peaches, old soup packets. At one point, I used a broomstick to knock tissues off a high shelf because I had run out and couldn't climb a step stool. One night, my fever broke, but I soaked through the blankets so badly I had to wrap myself in my old church coat until morning. On the third day, I called again. This time, I didn't ask for help. I just said, "I think I'm very sick." Mia replied, "Margaret, you're not dying. Please stop making everything about you. We have a lot on our plate." Then a click. I stared at my phone for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared. Then I laughed, one of those hollow, breathless laughs that comes not from humor, but from the sheer absurdity of disappointment. You give your life to people and they decide how little of it matters when it no longer benefits them. For 36 hours after that, I didn't hear a word from my daughter or her husband. But do you know who knocked on my door? My neighbor's teenage son, Ryan. He said his mom noticed I hadn't brought in the mail. He handed me a box of groceries and a thermos of soup. That soup tasted like salvation. I sat on the couch wrapped in my coat, sipping broth with my shaking hands, and thought, this boy doesn't owe me anything. But he showed up. That night, something changed. My fever lifted. My strength stirred. I got up slowly, but with a new kind of fuel burning in my bones. It wasn't just about getting better anymore. It was about remembering who I was, what I had, what they didn't know I had. Because here's the thing Mia and my daughter never bothered to ask. Whose name is on the deed to this house? The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of ache. Not in my chest, not in my bones, but deeper, older. It was the ache of being used. I shuffled to the drawer under the coffee table, the one that hadn't been opened in years. Inside, buried beneath old utility bills and birthday cards from friends who were now long gone, was a simple cream folder labeled Property, 1987. I opened it slowly, brushing away dust as if revealing a relic. There it was, the deed, my name, Margaret Ruth Ellison, sole owner, no co-signers, no shared titles, no trusts or transfers. This house, every brick, every beam was mine. And suddenly it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like leverage. I sat there, legs tucked under me like I used to do when reading to my kids, and read through every line. My fingers tingled. I had forgotten that when my husband died, I refinanced everything, paid off every cent over the years. Quietly, carefully. No one knew, because I never made a speech about it. I didn't need credit. But maybe I should have, maybe I let them believe I was just staying here, not owning here. Later that afternoon, I mustered enough strength to shuffle to the mailbox. The sun was out. The winter chill bit at my cheeks, but I didn't feel weak anymore. Inside the mailbox, aside from bills and junk, was a letter from Mia. No envelope, just folded notebook paper. It read, "Since you haven't been responding, we're going to assume you're not well. We'll check on you sometime this week. But if you need anything, you should really reach out more clearly. The words crawled off the page like ants, useless and irritating. I crumpled the letter and walked straight back to my kitchen. That's when I saw the calendar on the fridge. March 15th. Tax season. I laughed again, this time with more breath. Perfect. I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Leonard Baines, my old accountant who'd helped me file taxes for over 2 decades. His voice came through the speaker warm as ever. Margaret, he said, you sound different. I feel different, I replied. He asked how I was. I told him the truth, then asked him the more important question. Leonard, what would it take to convert this house into a formal rental property? There was a pause. Then, are you serious? As a heart attack, I replied. He laughed, then sighed. It's a lot of paperwork, but you're protected. And frankly, if they're not paying rent, they're tenants by favor. You can change that. I intend to, I said. That evening, I began the process. I gathered bank statements, property tax receipts, my old marriage certificate, and a few email exchanges that hinted at Mia and my daughter planning to take over the house eventually. They had been joking, but I wasn't laughing. What struck me wasn't just that they hadn't helped. It was how easily they assumed I had nothing to claim. A day later, Mia showed up. She walked in with her purse slung like a weapon and said, "We were worried, but looks like you're fine." No apology, not even pretend concern. She glanced around, wrinkled her nose at the unopened mail and soup containers, then plopped onto my recliner. My chair? Claire said you'd probably pull through. She thinks you're just getting more dramatic with age. I didn't reply. I looked her in the eye and said, "Could you help me scan some documents?" She blinked. "What kind of documents?" "Oh," I said lightly, "just formalizing the rental agreement." She blinked again. "Rental. What rental?" "This house," I said. "The one you've been living in without paying rent for 6 years." Silence. She shifted in her seat. "Margaret, I thought." "You thought wrong," I interrupted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stood there, not frail, not small, but as a woman who remembered every missed birthday call every time they brought takeout and never offered me a plate every time I heard them whispering about the old lady in the back room. Like I wasn't the reason they had a roof over their heads. "I'm converting the house into a rental," I said, "and the new tenants are welcome to apply. Fair rent. Market rate." Mia's face paled. "You can't do that." I smiled gently. I already did. And I had. The papers were in process. The notice would be mailed. A formal agreement or an exit, her choice. That night, I made myself real soup. From scratch. I sat at the kitchen table, the one they never invited me to sit at, and ate every spoonful like I was reclaiming space in my own life. I was still recovering. But I wasn't fragile. I wasn't forgotten. And I wasn't free housing. The next few days moved slowly, but every moment felt like it carried weight. I was healing, yes, but I was also watching, observing how Mia and Claire responded, now that I had shattered the illusion they built around my silence. Claire, my daughter, didn't come home right away. I heard from neighbors that she'd taken the boys on a much-needed weekend away after her work trip, as if my near-death illness had just been an inconvenient blip in their family calendar. But Mia stayed in the house. She tiptoed more, shut doors quietly, didn't blast the television like she used to. And for the first time in years, she knocked before entering my side of the house. Interesting. I spent those days combing through files, digital and paper. Leonard, my accountant, sent me forms for zoning tenancy classification and notice of occupancy change. I signed everyone with a steady hand. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was setting boundaries after a lifetime of letting others redraw them for me. Then Claire finally returned. She waltzed into the house, her heels clicking like punctuation marks, and greeted me with a breathy "Mom, you look so much better." I didn't smile. She launched into a tale about the spa, the drive, the cute little Airbnb in Vermont, and how the boys missed me. I nodded politely, then handed her a folder. "What's this?" she asked. "A formal rental agreement," I said. Her smile fell like wet laundry. I don't understand." "You will," I said. "It outlines the market rate rent for the house with an option to renew every year. If you and Mia would like to stay, this is what it will cost." Claire stared at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. But this is your house, she whispered. Yes, I said, and I've decided to start using it. She didn't argue, not then. Instead, she placed the folder on the coffee table like it might bite her and walked out. 2 hours later, I heard her arguing with Mia upstairs. You said she didn't care anymore. Well, clearly she does now. I thought she was half dead. Maybe we should have treated her like she was alive. I heard every word through the vent. And I didn't feel anger. I felt seen. That evening, Claire tried a new tactic guilt. She brought me tea, sat beside me, and said, Mom, we're not trying to take advantage of you. We just got used to helping out around here. I looked at her calmly. Claire, tell me the last time you cooked a meal in this house. She blinked. I waited. The last time you cleaned the bathroom you use. Or folded the laundry I left on the dryer. Nothing. I've been helping you, I said softly. Not the other way around. She looked away, eyes shiny. But tears didn't wash away truth. Later that night, I received a call from Leonard. The application had been approved. The city acknowledged the shift in zoning, and I now had the legal authority to evict if rent wasn't paid by the end of the following month. It wasn't a threat. It was a contract. Claire and Mia were officially tenants. I printed the letter and pinned it to the fridge right under a magnet that read, Don't mistake my silence for permission. The next morning, the fridge was strangely clean. The paper was gone. So was the magnet. I smiled. We were finally speaking the same language. That weekend, Claire hosted brunch. A small gathering, her friends from her real estate firm, a couple neighbors, and a woman she kept calling our next big client. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't leave the house. I stayed in my room quietly folding the last batch of documents. Ownership verification title, confirmation, and a letter I had drafted months ago but never sent. A will revision. The house, if sold, would benefit my grandson Ethan's college fund. Not Claire. Not Mia. Ethan. He was the only one who had knocked on my door that week with a bowl of cereal and a note that read, I love you, Grandma. I'm sorry I didn't say it when you were sick. That was enough. Later that evening, Mia knocked. Tentative. I opened the door. We've read the lease, she said. Claire's upset? I imagine she is. She said she wants to talk to you tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late, I said, stepping back. The contract becomes active at 10 a.m. Mia stood in the hallway, visibly stunned. Then, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard from her, she said, We never thought you'd do something like this. I never thought you'd treat me like furniture, I replied. She left without a word. And for the first time since I got sick, I slept through the night. Not because I was better, but because I was finally awake. The next morning arrived quietly. The house, once full of clatter and careless noise, now moved like a church, deliberate and cautious. I rose early, dressed neatly in a soft gray sweater and pressed slacks, made a small breakfast of toast and marmalade, and sat by the kitchen window to watch the light shift through the backyard. It was still my favorite part of this home, a space I'd tended to for decades, pruning roses and feeding squirrels like clockwork. At exactly 10 a.m., the lease agreement went into effect. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, just a subtle tightening in my chest. Not anxiety, not fear, but something more like closure. Claire didn't come downstairs. Instead, Mia entered the kitchen alone. She moved carefully like someone approaching a skittish animal. Claire's still upset, she said, not looking me in the eyes. I'm not surprised, I replied calmly, turning another page in my book. She feels like you blindsided her. No, I corrected. She just never expected consequences. Mia took a long breath. So, what happens now? You start paying rent, I said. Or you find a new place to live. She finally looked at me. You're really doing this. I set my book down gently. I've already done it. That evening, I heard Claire's door slam upstairs. Then the texting began. Ping, ping, ping. I didn't check. I already knew the content. Anger disguised as apology. Guilt wrapped in self-pity. Maybe a few after all I've done for you, remarks thrown in. I left my phone face down. Because the truth was this. I had given Claire more than she ever knew. Paid off student loans when she was drowning in credit card debt after college. Helped cover IVF treatments when she and Mia were struggling to conceive. Bought this house outright in full and then signed it over so they'd feel secure. I did it all quietly. They didn't ask. I didn't expect thanks. But I did expect humanity. And when I fell ill, I expected at least the illusion of care. I got neglect, indifference, a cold shoulder that chilled me deeper than any fever. The next day, Mia brought me coffee. "From that little cafe you like," she said, placing the cup on the counter. It was warm, kind, almost touching. But manipulation wears 1,000 faces. "Mia, I said you're a smart woman. I need you to understand something." She straightened. "This house is mine. The fact that I didn't kick you both out the day I recovered is an act of grace." Her face flushed, jaw twitching just slightly. "You're raising my grandsons here." "That's the only reason I gave you the lease." She nodded. "And I don't want your friendship," I added. "I want your respect." She nodded again. But she didn't meet my gaze when she walked away. The following week, Claire started showing the house. "Yes, my house." I overheard her boasting to a couple. "The yard gets the best morning light and we could vacate quickly, just a matter of paperwork." When I stepped outside with a watering can, she froze. "Oh, this is my mother," she said, her voice suddenly brittle. I nodded politely at the visitors. "You're touring the house?" I asked sweetly. Claire tried to jump in, but the woman answered first. "Yes. Claire said you were moving to an assisted facility." I tilted my head as if curious. "That's odd," I replied, "because the deed and the lease agreement are both in my name. I'm not going anywhere." The couple exchanged glances. Claire stammered, face drained of color. I excused myself and returned to the garden, letting that moment unravel without interference. Later that night, she stormed into the kitchen. "You embarrassed me," she hissed. "No," I said gently. "I corrected you." "You're punishing me." "No," I said again. "I'm setting boundaries. You can't just change everything." I looked up then, holding her gaze. "You changed it first. When I got sick. When you left me alone. When Mia said I'd have to manage because she had work and you told me not to guilt-trip the family. That's when everything changed." She opened her mouth, closed it, turned, left. That night, I pulled a worn envelope from my dresser, the original deed to the house. It was never legally transferred despite all the verbal arrangements. I had protected myself without even meaning to. The next morning, I scanned it, sent a digital copy to Leonard, and asked him to place it on record with the local property registrar. Just in case. Just in case Claire got clever. The silence between us deepened in the days that followed. No more attempts at brunch. No more late-night apologies or morning peace offerings. Just cold walls and icy stares. But something else was growing in the space between. Power. Not over them. Over me, and I wasn't planning to give it back. I never thought a kitchen could feel like a battlefield. But in the mornings, as Claire and Mia bustled around pretending I wasn't there, tension curled into the steam from their coffee. They moved with an exaggerated casualness, the way people do when they're acting or lying. The children, bless them, were the only ones untouched by the drama. My grandsons still ran to me after school, still asked me to read their bedtime stories, still clung to my arm like I was the warmest place in the house. But one night something shifted. I heard whispers from the hallway. "She's not going to live forever," Claire murmured. "Mia, that doesn't mean we just wait it out." "Claire, there's ways." I stopped breathing. "There's ways?" It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the calculating stillness, as if I were a legal problem to be filed away. The next morning, I installed a lock on my bedroom door. No discussion, no explanation, just a quiet click of a boundary. Claire noticed it first. "Oh, so now you're locking us out," she scoffed over dinner. "No," I said calmly, slicing a piece of chicken. "I'm locking myself in." Her jaw tightened. Mia's eyes flickered between us. We all knew what that meant. I wasn't going to be caught unaware again. Days passed. The lease was officially filed. The house remained legally in my name, and every week rent was due and late. Claire claimed they were adjusting. I charged a late fee. Mia called it petty. I called it legal. That month, I used their rent to refinish the hardwood floors, something Claire had always said was too expensive. They came home to the scent of polish and varnish. Claire's face crumpled when she saw it. "You're making this house yours again," she muttered. I smiled. "It always was." But the final blow wasn't a renovation or a rent invoice. It came from a piece of mail. A letter addressed to me arrived in a cream envelope handwritten in careful curved script. I opened it over tea heart, thudding. Something about the delicate handwriting made me feel 15 again. It was from my late husband's cousin Linda. Inside was a letter and a small photo, one I hadn't seen in decades. A snapshot of Claire, age 10, sitting on my lap eating homemade peach cobbler on the front steps of our old apartment. Beneath the photo, Linda had written, "She used to love you without conditions." I stared at that line for a long time, because I remembered that little girl. I remembered the birthday parties, the scraped knees, the endless math homework, the nights she cried over college rejection letters, and the mornings I made her scrambled eggs when she finally got in. I remembered the girl who used to braid my hair just to feel close. But that girl had disappeared, and in her place was someone who saw me as a burden until the title deed said otherwise. Still, something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from the weight of memory. That night, I pulled down the heavy file box from my closet and sorted through the records. Hospital bills. I paid tuition receipts, mortgage statements, grocery lists, all the invisible ways I had carried her. I organized them neatly. I made copies, not for leverage, for legacy, because one day when I was gone, I wanted someone to see what a mother's silence looked like. All the ways we love, without being asked, all the ways we give without keeping score. Claire might never understand, but maybe her sons would. Maybe they would read those pages and see something more than bitterness or coldness. Maybe they would see a woman who had limits and the courage to enforce them. The next morning, I placed a manila envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, a single photo, the peach cobbler picture. Nothing else. When Claire saw it, she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Later that evening, I found the photo placed on my dresser between my perfume bottle and my wedding ring. No note, but I knew what it meant. Some part of her remembered, and some part of me maybe was willing to believe that was enough for now. It was the third Tuesday of the month when Claire and Mia missed rent again. No call, no message, just silence. They walked through the front door that evening, bags in hand from some boutique sale, laughter still hanging on their lips, until they saw the envelope taped to the fridge. It was official, formal, cold. Notice of late rent and warning of lease, term violation. Claire ripped it down and stared at me across the kitchen island. "You're really doing this," she snapped. I stood, tea in hand, unwavering. "I'm doing what any landlord would do when the tenants fail to pay." Mia stepped in, the peacemaker. "It's been a rough month. I lost 2 clients, and I was dealing with a family emergency," Claire added with a pointed look at me, as if I was the emergency. "You live in a $3 million home," I said calmly, "for $1,200 a month. Don't insult me." She slammed the fridge. The sound echoed. "You're being vindictive." "No," I said, my voice as smooth as the steam rising from my cup. "I'm finally being fair." And it was true. For years, fairness had meant swallowing pain in exchange for peace. It had meant ignoring insults, forgetting birthdays unreciprocated, and pretending not to notice the way Claire bragged about her self-made success in rooms filled with people who had no idea who paid her tuition. But now, fairness looked like a signed lease and a paper trail. They sulked for days after that. I could feel the temperature of the house shift. Silence had sharp corners. Eye contact was avoided like poison. And yet, I slept better than I had in months. Until I got sick again. It started as a cough, subtle and annoying. By the second day, it was a fever. I knocked on Claire's door. She opened it halfway, brows raised, phone still in hand. "I think I need to go to the doctor," I murmured. She didn't move. "Call an Uber," she said. "I'm on a Zoom with a potential investor." Then she shut the door. I stood there dazed. Like a ghost, like furniture, like nothing. And I realized something. She hadn't changed. The photo, the rent, the lease, none of it changed who she had become. That night, I made a quiet decision. I reached out to a real estate attorney and began the process of preparing a formal notice of eviction. Not as punishment, but as a boundary. I wasn't dying. I had the flu, and I had had enough. By the weekend, I had a notarized letter in hand and a plan in motion. But something unexpected happened. A knock on my door. It was my eldest grandson, Evan. He stood there with a cup of ginger tea and a handful of tissues. Mom said you were sick. I blinked back tears. He was 12, gangly and shy. He looked like Claire when she was young, before the resentment grew, before the coldness settled in. He sat beside me silent as I sipped the tea. You know, he said you're the only person who ever remembered I hate ketchup. I smiled weakly. That's important knowledge. She forgets every time. Even yesterday. Put it on my burger like always. He didn't say it in anger, just quiet disappointment. Why do you think she does that? He asked. I paused, my voice brittle. Sometimes people get so caught up in their own stories, they forget the details that make others feel seen. He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. The next morning, I handed the eviction letter to Claire. She tore it open, laughed, then read it again slower. You can't be serious. I am. You're evicting us. Your daughter. Your grandson. No, I said. I'm evicting 2 tenants who repeatedly broke their lease and mistreated the landlord. Her eyes narrowed. You'll never see me again. I didn't blink. That's your choice. She stormed out. Mia followed quietly. No fight in her steps. I heard the car doors slam, the engine roar, and then silence. The kind that feels like freedom. For days, I thought that would be the end. Until a week later, Evan returned. Alone. He stood at my door with a backpack and a notebook. I wrote you something, he said. A school assignment. About the person who changed my life. I invited him in. He read the essay aloud. It began with a line that broke something open inside me. She's the only adult who ever listened. By the end, I was crying openly, no shame left in me. Because in that moment, I knew the legacy I was leaving behind wasn't a house. It wasn't money or legal papers. It was a boy who saw me, and in return, I would always make sure he saw himself completely, unapologetically. Because love isn't just history. It's a choice. One that even after all the wounds I still made. I gave Evan the guest bedroom for the weekend. It used to be Claire's room before she married Mia and moved into their downtown loft before they asked if they could temporarily stay in my home during renovations that never began. Now that room was filled with new energy piles of library books, a digital sketchpad, and the unmistakable sound of pre-teen music thumping softly behind a closed door. It wasn't permanent, of course. Claire and Mia would come for him eventually, but I cherished every second. Over breakfast, Evan asked, "Are you mad at my mom's?" I stirred honey into my tea slowly. "I'm not mad," I said honestly, "but I'm finished." Finished with what? With being treated like an afterthought in a house I built. He didn't fully get it, but he nodded anyway. It was strange how clearly I saw it now, like a fog had lifted. Every little micro-slight, every missed thank you, the way Claire had started referring to my bedroom as the back room. How Mia would offer me leftovers like I was a boarder and not the woman who had deeded the house to a trust years ago under my maiden name, a name no one in that house even remembered. It was Evelyn when I was young. Evelyn Marks. Not Evelyn Carter, the name I took when I married and gave up half of who I was to fit someone else's world. Now, after years of sickness, neglect, and silence, that old name had become my armor. I remembered when I bought the house. Claire had just dropped out of graduate school. She and Mia were drowning in credit card debt. I had quietly paid off one card, then another, until they could breathe again. When they still struggled, I transferred the down payment for a house they couldn't afford. But I never put my name on the title, at least not publicly. Instead, I bought the house in the name Evelyn Marks Trust, a name they assumed belonged to a faceless financial backer. It gave them dignity. I thought I was helping. But now I saw it differently. I had enabled their blindness. So when I filed the eviction notice and began preparing legal proof of ownership, I didn't just print out documents, I compiled a narrative. The trust transfer, the original deeds, the notarized letters, all under Evelyn Marks. And when I sent the formal package to Claire and Mia's attorney, I included a handwritten note. "You forgot who owns the walls you hide behind." The response was swift and furious. Their lawyer called mine the same day. "She never told them?" he asked. "No," I said simply. And now they know. Claire showed up the next morning. No Evan this time. Just her in rage. "You were planning this the whole time?" she spat. "No," I replied. I was hoping I wouldn't have to. You're a snake. I'm your mother. Not anymore. She stormed off once again. But this time, I didn't flinch. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't from Claire. It was from Mia. Inside was a check for the full rent owed with interest. A sticky note was attached. I'm sorry. For not standing up sooner. For not seeing what Evan sees. It didn't absolve everything. But it said more than Claire ever had. And it told me one important thing. Someone in that house still understood what it meant to make amends. That weekend, Evan returned. He helped me in the garden, mostly pulling up weeds and getting soil on his jeans. At one point, he asked, "Do you think people can unlearn how to be selfish?" I looked at him. Truly. Looked. "I think people can relearn how to see," I said. We spent the evening eating grilled cheese and watching old black and white movies. He laughed at things I hadn't realized were still funny. And I thought, this is enough. No revenge. No gloating. Just a quiet restoration of power and presence. The home was mine. The name was mine. And finally, so was the peace. The first thing I did Monday morning was call Mr. Dewhurst, my old estate attorney who now ran a boutique legal office specializing in property trusts and elder protection. He remembered me right away. "You still using the Marks Trust?" he asked with a chuckle. "I am," I replied. "And it's time we used it." By noon, he had filed a formal notice to vacate under the full authority of the trust ownership. Because the house wasn't technically under Evelyn Carter's name, it fell outside of any shared assets Claire or Mia had ever legally touched. Their names weren't on the deed. They hadn't paid a dime toward the property taxes. The trust had funded every remodel, every roof repair, every leak in the kitchen sink. They were on paper tenants, entitled to nothing more than 30 days' notice. And I gave them 45. I wasn't cruel. But I was done being kind to people who weaponized my kindness. The news didn't sit well with them, of course. They tried to spin the story to Evan, to their friends, even to a neighbor or two who stopped by with that look of, "What happened?" Claire's version, "My mother snapped and evicted us." My version, "They forgot whose name was on the foundation." But what truly struck me was how quiet it all became. No begging, no confrontation, just a simmering silence. And then, boxes. I watched from the garden window as Mia carried out framed Prince coffee mugs, a lamp with a crooked neck. Claire always swore she'd fix but never did. They were moving out. They were really moving out. And I, Evelyn Marks, was finally moving back in. There was a strange moment the night before they left, when Mia knocked on my door. Alone. She stepped inside, eyes red. "I just wanted to say, I know we hurt you," she said softly, "but I want to be better. I want Evan to remember us for the good things." I nodded. "He still does. He sees more than you think. I know you probably won't forgive Claire." I didn't say anything. Instead, I asked her something unexpected. "Do you still want what's best for Evan?" "Always." "Then don't teach him. Silence is strength." She blinked. "Teach him that strength is speaking truth. With grace." Mia's lip trembled, but she nodded and left without another word. The next morning, they were gone. I stood in the empty hallway for the first time in years and heard the house breathe. No murmurs from behind closed doors. No passive-aggressive clatter of dishes. Just stillness. I cleaned every room myself. Not out of obligation, but as a ritual. I opened the windows, let the wind carry out what lingered. And then I unpacked the keepsakes I had hidden for years. My wedding photo. My mother's recipe book. The clay angel Evan made me when he was 5, still chipped on one wing. I restored every corner of the home, my home, with memory, not resentment. The last thing I placed was a framed document. The original trust certificate, signed, Evelyn Marks. I hung it in the hallway by the stairs next to the portrait of my parents. Let them see who built the house. Let them remember what they forgot. And let me never again forget my own worth. That afternoon, I got a text from Evan. "Can I still visit? I miss the tea and the old movies." I replied, "The door's open. Always." And when he showed up the following Saturday carrying a bag of marshmallows and 2 mismatched mugs, I knew one thing. I hadn't just reclaimed a house. I had reclaimed the heartbeat of a home. It was surreal how quickly the house returned to me, not just in name, but in rhythm. The ticking of the clock in the hallway sounded clearer. The floorboards no longer creaked under tension. Even the wind brushing the curtains at night felt gentler, as if the home itself had exhaled. Evan started coming over every weekend. At first, we just watched old Cary Grant movies or baked simple scones. But slowly he opened up. "Mom says you were always kind," he said one day mid-bite. "But she also said you were too soft." I laughed gently. Kindness and softness aren't the same, sweetheart. And sometimes people say that when they fear kindness has boundaries. He didn't fully understand then, but the seed was planted. Meanwhile, Claire and Mia moved into a rental 2 towns over. I didn't ask how they were managing, and they didn't offer the information. Mia sent the rent checks on time without a word. Claire didn't speak to me at all. But then, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the looping script immediately. Claire's, it was short. "Mom, I didn't think you'd ever push back. Maybe that's why I thought I could get away with it. I'm still angry, but I understand now. I know you won't forgive me just because I said sorry, but I needed to say it anyway. I hope Evan never learns from my worst moments. Claire." I folded the letter slowly, not with triumph, not with satisfaction, with something quieter, older, wiser. The kind of peace that only comes when you realize you're no longer trying to change the past, you're just refusing to repeat it. I didn't reply, but I placed the letter in a drawer beside the old photos of Evan's first birthday, the ones Claire used to love. And I let it sit, not as a reconciliation, as a record. A few weeks later, I joined a community reading club. I brought Evan along one evening. He was the youngest by decades, but he listened as the older women read poetry, laughed over mispronunciations, and shared pieces of their lives. Afterward, on the way home, he asked Grandma, "How did you become so strong?" I smiled at him through the rearview mirror. "By being underestimated," I said, and then choosing not to stay there. He was quiet for a long while, then said, "I think I'll write about that for school." Back home, I passed the hallway with the framed trust certificate. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the glass. My name gleamed faintly in the reflection. That night, I made tea, turned off all the lights except for the lamp by my chair, and sat with a notebook. I didn't write a letter back to Claire. I wrote a letter to myself. "Dear Evelyn, you were never just a mother-in-law, or a housekeeper, or a woman who got old. You were a builder, a preserver, a witness, a warrior of silence who finally found her voice. You didn't lose them. They lost the version of you that tolerated erasure. And in return, you found something much greater. Yourself." Signed, Evelyn Marks. I closed the notebook, eyes damp but heart steady. This wasn't just about a house, or rent, or revenge. This was a story of reclaiming space in brick and in breath, of remembering who you were and deciding who you'd be. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, the last thing I saw was the flicker of my name on the wall. Not as a tenant, as the owner. The seasons shifted as they always do. Spring rain tapped gently against my windows, coaxing tulips from the garden beds I'd once tended with Claire. Life felt quieter now, but not empty. Purpose doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with clean sheets, warm tea, and the knowledge that you're finally living on your own terms. Mia's rent arrived each month like clockwork. There were no thank you notes, no Christmas cards, just the exact amount deposited electronically, void of emotion. And that was fine. I didn't need her gratitude. I needed her respect, and in this odd, poetic way, I had it. But something unexpected began to surface. Evan started asking questions. "Why doesn't Mom talk to you? Did you always own this house? Why do you keep the lights on downstairs even when no one's there?" Children have a way of pressing into the silence like their fingers against a bruise. Curious, innocent, relentless. I answered what I could, held back what I couldn't, and prayed that one day he'd piece it together gently. One afternoon, while he was helping me water the plants, he looked up at me and said, "You know, you're my safe place." I paused, watering can midair. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I don't know. Like you don't get loud or mean, but you remember everything. And when I'm here, it's like no one can ignore me." I knelt beside him, one hand on the soil, one on his shoulder. That's because you deserve to be seen, Evan. Always. He nodded like he understood, but he was still so young, still tucked between his mother's bitterness and my bittersweet calm. That evening, after he'd gone home, I lit a single candle in the dining room. The same room where I'd once been ignored during Christmas dinner, where Claire had laughed while my plate remained empty, where silence had screamed louder than words. Now the house was quiet on my terms. I picked up a folder from the side table one I'd prepared months ago, long before Claire's letter. Inside, copies of the trust letters from the banknotes from my attorney. The story of how I'd structured ownership behind the scenes. I'd originally intended it for Claire Proof a Reckoning. But now, I slid the folder into a fireproof box and labeled it, "For Evan when he's ready," because revenge wasn't the end. Legacy was, and my legacy would be more than a headline, more than a rented room. It would be a blueprint for Evan, for the women after me, for anyone who had ever been told their value depended on silence. One morning, I opened the mailbox to find another envelope. Handwritten again, but this one was from Mia. It read, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I remember how you stayed up with Evan when he was sick. How you never once asked for anything. I thought strength was controlling everything. But maybe it's what you did, staying soft even when we hardened against you. I'm sorry. Mia." I sat with the letter in my lap, eyes closed. Not because I needed the apology, but because I knew how hard it must have been to write. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Every decision I'd made had already said it all. Weeks later, as I trimmed lavender in the garden, Evan came running down the path. "Grandma, guess what? My teacher asked who our hero is, and I said it's you." I laughed gently, brushing soil off my gloves. "Really? Why me?" "Because you changed everything. But you didn't yell. You just stood still and made people notice." I knelt again, eye level with the boy who was already wiser than many adults I knew. "I'm proud of you, Evan." He grinned. "One day I want to live here. Not just visit." I smiled, eyes misting. "Then I'll make sure there's always a place for you." And in that moment I knew. This house wasn't just reclaimed, it was reborn. Not in concrete and trust papers, but in whispered truths, quiet strength, and a boy who saw his grandmother not as someone discarded, but as a lighthouse, a presence that doesn't chase storms. It survives them, and shines anyway. The following Sunday, Mia stopped by without calling. That alone was unusual. She arrived not with bitterness or demands, but with Evan in tow, holding a small basket of muffins. I opened the door slowly, unsure of what this visit meant. Evan's eyes sparkled when he saw me. "Grandma," he yelled, running past Mia to hug me. Mia stood at the threshold like a guest, not a daughter-in-law, not a tenant, just someone who wasn't sure if she still belonged. "Can we come in?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, not because she deserved it, but because I'd already chosen peace. The kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission or give away power. The kind that holds its head high without burning bridges, just letting them grow old and fall quietly into the river. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once laid my head during chemo, where she'd once left dishes for me to clean as I struggled to hold down water. Now she brought muffins and stared at her hands. "I came to say thank you," she whispered, "and to ask something." I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. "Evan's school is starting a new family project. He wants to trace our history. And I realized I don't know anything about yours." I blinked. "My history. You, your family, where you came from, your mother, your grandmother." "I've never asked." "No," I said gently. "You haven't." She bit her lip. "I didn't realize how much I'd shut you out until Evan asked if you had baby pictures of his dad." There was a long pause. Then I stood, walked to the hall closet, and pulled down a box marked James. Years 110. I placed it in front of her without a word. Evan dove in with the joy only children know, pulling out faded photographs, little socks, a lock of hair in a dated envelope. Mia's hands shook as she picked up a note James had written at age 8. "I love Mommy because she makes me feel safe." I watched her face crumple as if the weight of all she'd done came crashing down in that single innocent phrase. "I was wrong," she whispered. I stayed silent. There was nothing more to prove. I thought, If I took care of everything, I wouldn't end up like you. Dependent, quiet, invisible. The word invisible stung. You thought I was invisible? I asked softly. She looked up ashamed. Yes, but now I see. You were just never loud. Not because you had no voice, but because you chose when to use it. I exhaled slowly. Being quiet doesn't mean I didn't see everything I said. I saw you roll your eyes when I coughed. I heard the whispered jokes about old people smells. I watched you teach Evan to ignore my questions because you were too busy scrolling through your phone. Mia winced. I was sick, and you walked around me like I was the furniture. Then when I got better, you looked shocked as if my survival was an inconvenience. I know, she whispered. I forgave you already, I said. She looked up. You did? Yes. The moment you packed up and left, I didn't want to carry your shame in my body any longer. The kitchen was silent except for the soft turning of photo pages. Then Evan said, Grandma, can you tell me about Daddy when he was my age? And just like that, we were pulled back to the center of what mattered. I began to speak not to Mia, but to Evan. To the future, to the part of my legacy that still had hope. And Mia listened silent as the weight of what she'd almost destroyed settled around her shoulders. Later that night, after they left, I looked around my home, the home I owned, the life I'd rebuilt. Mia still paid rent. That wouldn't change. But something deeper had shifted. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I had reclaimed something far more precious. The right to be seen, to be heard, and to be remembered. Not just as the woman who suffered, but the woman who endured and rose. The days that followed were quiet in the best way. No doors slammed. No footsteps stomped. No silence hung over the house like a punishment. Instead, I filled my mornings with soft music, brewed my coffee slowly, and opened the curtains wide as if to invite the world to notice I was still here. Not only alive but living. Mia continued to send the rent through bank transfer on time with polite notes. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence now wasn't about weakness. It was a boundary. A wall she had to earn her way through, brick by thoughtful brick. But something unexpected happened that week. A letter arrived. Not from Mia, not from James. It was from James's company, a formal notice confirming that his life insurance policy had matured and included my name as one of the beneficiaries. My hands trembled as I opened it, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. James hadn't forgotten me. Even in death, he'd written my name into a future where Mia had tried to erase me. I sat in my reading chair, the one they used to mock for smelling of old books and peppermint, and cried. Not the kind of tears that soak your chest in grief, but the kind that clean your memory. Tears of validation, of being remembered. The payout wasn't grand, just enough to fix the garden fence, maybe take a small trip. But it wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the signature. To my mother, who loved me louder than she ever spoke. That sentence hit like poetry, because it was true. For decades I'd spoken in acts of service, in watching Evan when Mia worked late, in mending shirts, in remembering every dentist appointment, in saving coupons for their groceries, in staying silent when I was tired and smiling when I was forgotten. Love had been my native tongue, even when theirs was neglect. Now it was all coming back, not in vengeance, but in justice. I took the envelope, walked into the garden, and sat on the stone bench James used to climb when he was 5. I ran my fingers along the cracks he used to stuff acorns into and whispered, "Thank you, my son." Behind me, I heard the click of the back gate. It was Mia. No Evan this time. Just her. She didn't knock or call out. She simply stood there. "I saw the envelope," she said softly. "The insurance company emailed me too." I turned slowly. "Then, you know." She nodded. "I didn't expect it. Not after everything." "You didn't expect he'd remember me?" I asked, not with anger but clarity. "I didn't expect he'd love you more than me," she whispered. I laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was a laugh of knowing. "It's not about more or less, Mia. It's about different. I gave him the love that grows you. You gave him the love that expects him to bloom on cue." She sank down on the stone path beside me. "Is there any way to fix this?" she asked. "Not the money. Us." That word us sounded foreign coming from her lips. "You can't fix what you refused to water for 10 years, I replied gently. "But you can start planting something new." "How?" I pointed to the broken fence near the garden shed. Help me fix that. She blinked. The fence. Start with something small. Show up. Listen. Pay attention. That's how it begins. She nodded slowly, as if understanding had finally cracked through her guilt. That afternoon, we repaired the fence together. In silence. With no promises. Just hammers, nails, and the sound of rebuilding something. Maybe not a relationship, but at least a moment of mutual effort. It was enough. And when the sun began to set, casting golden lines across the yard, I looked at her and said, "Tomorrow, bring Evan. We'll plant tulips." She looked surprised. "I thought we were just fixing the fence." "No," I smiled. "We're planting spring." She gave a small nod. And in that quiet act, something shifted. She wasn't forgiven. Not yet. But she was present. And sometimes presence is the first apology worth listening to. Evan arrived the next morning clutching a tiny bag of tulip bulbs and a shovel almost too big for his 6-year-old hands. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and for a fleeting moment it was like nothing had changed. No nursing home talks, no whispers behind closed doors, no absence during flu season. "Grandma!" he shouted, running toward me with muddy shoes and unfiltered joy. I knelt down, my knees cracking with protest, and opened my arms. When he hugged me, I let myself believe this might be the beginning of something worth nurturing. We spent the morning digging Evan, eagerly stabbing the ground, Mia watching from the patio. She hadn't asked to help this time. She'd learned perhaps that sometimes presence was enough. For now, while Evan and I worked, I told him stories, not the kind about fairies or dragons, but about his father. "Your dad once planted a whole garden of sunflowers when he was just a little older than you," I said, gently pressing a bulb into the earth. "Why sunflowers?" Evan asked. "Because they face the sun," I said, "even when the sky's gray." He said it reminded him to keep his head up. Evan looked at me and nodded solemnly, as if storing this detail deep in his chest. Later, we washed our hands at the outdoor sink. Mia brought lemonade awkwardly with 2 glasses instead of 3. Then, realizing, she returned and brought a third without a word. Small step. I didn't praise her. I didn't comment. Let her learn to be thoughtful without expecting applause. That night, I sat in my chair, the one Mia used to say smelled like storage, and read a book James once gave me. Between the pages, I found a note in his handwriting. "You always say nothing, but you taught me everything." I closed the book slowly, clutching it to my chest. In the hallway, I heard Evan's voice. "Mom, why didn't we live here all along?" There was a pause. "Because I thought she didn't want us here," Mia replied. Another pause. "Well, she wants me," Evan said firmly, "and I think you need to try again." Out of the mouths of children, truth often walks in barefoot. The next morning, I found a neatly folded letter on the kitchen table, unsigned, but unmistakably Mia's. No dramatic apology, just a simple line. "If you ever want this to be a home again, I'll earn the right to stay." I didn't respond. I left a list of groceries on the counter instead, with handwriting only slightly passive-aggressive, and a note at the bottom. "Take Evan to the market with you. He likes the blueberries near the window." This was how we would rebuild, not with grand gestures, but with small kindnesses that didn't erase the past, but slowly rewrote the present. And in that quiet season of repair, I realized something. I wasn't just healing from neglect. I was teaching, not just Evan, but Mia too. Because sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't exile, it's elevation. It's living in such a way that others have to rise to meet you. And Mia, she had a long climb ahead. The rhythm of our strange coexistence settled into something that resembled peace, an uneasy kind, like truce between nations after years of Cold War. Mia stayed in the guest room and Evan in the smaller room off the garden. I didn't offer my bedroom. That space remained mine, lined with books and memories. No apology could undo. I watched her tiptoe around my kitchen like a tenant, which in truth she was. The lease was real now, drawn up, notarized, and legally binding. Her name on paper, mine on title. She paid rent on the 1st of each month. Direct deposit. No delays. But what mattered more was how she began paying in different currency. Time, effort, presence. She began joining me in the kitchen. At first just observing, then slowly slicing, stirring, seasoning. I said nothing but made room beside me at the counter. Her motions were hesitant, like a pianist returning to a forgotten score. But she was trying. It was Evan again who broke the silence one evening. "Grandma," he asked, "why do you have so many recipe cards with Mom's name on them?" I glanced over. Mia froze. I replied gently, "Because your mom used to love to cook when she was your age. She'd help me roll dough on Saturday mornings and sneak sugar cubes when she thought I wasn't looking." Evan looked stunned. "You did?" Mia smiled faintly. "I forgot that." "No," I corrected. "You just stopped remembering." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. And like many facts, it stung but offered a place to begin again. One morning, a box arrived at the door. Inside, a framed photo of James, Mia, and Evan taken the year before the sickness. I hadn't seen it in years. No note, no flourish, just the photo. Mia placed it on the mantel without a word, and slowly over the weeks, we began setting the table with 3 plates again. On the Sunday that marked 6 months since I returned home, Evan asked if we could all go for a walk together. He held my hand in one, his mother's in the other, and swung our arms like a pendulum between generations. "I'm glad we all live here now," he said simply. I didn't correct him. Technically, she didn't live here, she rented. But emotionally, maybe we were beginning to occupy the same space again. Later that night, Mia came into my room uninvited but cautious. She sat at the foot of my bed like she used to after James passed, when grief had made us equals for a brief time. "I was scared," she said softly. I didn't speak. Scared to lose James, then scared I'd lose myself. And when you got sick, I didn't know how to be both mother and daughter. So I chose one. Still, I said nothing. "You didn't deserve that." She reached into her pocket and held out a key. "I don't want to rent this place anymore. Not if I'm renting space in your heart too." I looked at the key, then at her, then away. "You're not ready," I said. She nodded. No protest. "But you're welcome to keep trying." And with that, I turned out the lamp, rolled over, and let the silence say what words couldn't. Because forgiveness isn't a gift you wrap once. It's a meal you serve slowly, course by course, until everyone's had a chance to taste what they once took for granted. And tonight, the table had 3 chairs again. On a cool spring morning, I sat at my dining table with a fresh cup of tea and a letter from my lawyer. It was about the trust I had been revising over the last few months. My home, my savings, my shares, all of it had been reviewed, restructured, and prepared for a future I now felt more in control of. The house was now in a living trust, one that couldn't be sold, mortgaged, or tampered with by anyone without my consent. My name was still etched in the deed. And when I passed, the decisions would unfold not as punishment, but as clarity. I had included Evan in it all. Not because I wanted to use my wealth as a weapon, but because he was the one who had kept me grounded in humanity. And Mia, she wasn't disinherited. That would have been too simple, too final. Instead, she was included with terms. Terms that required kindness, care, and consistency. It was a blueprint for redemption, not revenge. Later that week, we hosted a dinner. Just the 3 of us. Evan helped me in the kitchen. Mia brought fresh flowers from the market. The table was set with linen napkins, old china, and the same casserole dish James once joked could survive a war. During dessert, Evan piped up again. "Grandma," he said between spoonfuls of peach cobbler, "do you remember that time Mom didn't bring you soup when you were sick?" Mia's face turned pink. "Yes," I said calmly. "But I also remember she brings me tea now. Every morning." Evan nodded like a judge passing a fair verdict. That night, when Mia stood in the doorway of my room again, she didn't bring keys or words or apologies. She just brought herself. "I don't think I can ever undo what I did," she said. "No," I replied. "But you're not supposed to. You're just supposed to keep doing what's right." She reached for my hand. "Do you think I'm still your daughter?" The question pierced deeper than any accusation ever could. I squeezed her fingers gently. I never stopped thinking that I said, "Even when you stopped acting like it." She broke down, not in some theatrical sob, but in the kind of quiet release only mothers recognize. A shaking of the shoulders, a silent surrender, a breath held too long finally exhaled. We sat there for minutes or maybe hours, and somewhere between the ticking clock and the steady hum of nighttime crickets outside, I realized something vital. It wasn't the house that gave me power. It was the boundary. It was the silence I used not to punish but to teach. It was the dignity I reclaimed by choosing not to shout, not to shame, but to stand. By the end of that month, Mia stopped being my tenant. Not legally, she still paid rent, but emotionally, spiritually, maternally, she had returned. And one morning, as I watched Evan leave for school, he turned and kissed both of us on the cheek, then said, "I like it better when we all live here." That made me smile, because sometimes healing doesn't come from thunderous confrontations. Sometimes it arrives in quiet breakfasts, in borrowed cookbooks, in a spare key left quietly on the hallway hook. And while I may never forget the day Mia ignored me while I was sick, I'll also never forget the day she remembered how to be my daughter. It's tempting to believe that justice must always come in dramatic forms: a slammed door, a final eviction, a will rewritten in fire. But life, especially life as a mother, often operates in quieter currencies. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I just needed to act with intention, to make sure my absence meant something, to turn my silence into a lesson, not a punishment. Mia will carry her guilt. That's hers. But she also carries a second chance. And not everyone gets one of those. Evan, he's the bridge. The reminder that love doesn't skip generations. That healing can move forward even when the past stays bruised. I still sleep in the same room. The house is still mine. But the energy has shifted. There's laughter again. Shared meals. Honesty, however cautious. And I'm no longer invisible. To the women watching, listening, wondering if their silence matters, it does. To the mothers who gave too much and received too little, reclaim your space, not with fury, but with grace. And maybe one day the ones who forgot your worth will find their way back to your table. But if they don't, eat well, sleep peacefully, and never forget you are the deed, not the tenant.